Square Enix has done something they've never done before this past year. They released 2 mainline Final Fantasy titles within the same fiscal year, with both of them being exclusive to PlayStation 5. With that in mind, you would think that Square would be reporting record profits. Instead, unfortunately, what I have today is mostly bad news, and what they've announced today may change the trajectory of the entire company. This is incredibly serious news, and an absolutely pivotal moment for Square Enix. So please, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are closing in on 98k, hoping to reach 100,000 by the end of the year. And if you love Final Fantasy, this is the place to be. So starting out with a very big question, we still do not have updated numbers on Final Fantasy 16, nor do we have numbers at all on Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. However, mainline Final Fantasy is the bread and butter of Square Enix, and usually just releasing one of these in a fiscal year is more than enough for the company to usually have good news. And the result of Final Fantasy 16 and Rebirth together is that sales are up 1%. Yeah, like I said, things are not looking good. With Square Enix citing the recent quote, operating losses grew due to higher development cost amortization and advertising expenses, as well as higher content valuation losses versus the previous fiscal year. If I'm to make this more plain and simple, the cost needed to develop and advertise these games was exceedingly high, and it seems like the sales of their HD games wasn't enough to cover that. This put their HD games division at an operating loss of 8.1 billion yen. That is approximately $51.9 million. Ouch. That hurts. The MMO division also declined, but that's to be expected as last fiscal year did not have a Final Fantasy XIV expansion. Things also aren't doing particularly hot on the mobile division. In the games for smart devices / PC browser subsegment, net sales and profits declined compared to the previous fiscal year as the June 2023 launch of Dragon Quest Champions and the September 2023 launch of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis were unable to compensate for factors including weak performance by existing titles. And to top it all off, operating income has decreased by 26.6%. Now, some of their segments are up, such as publication and merchandising, which are performing very well and have had significant growth in sales and profit. This is mostly pretty rough. Of course, I know many of you want to talk about the elephant in the room. Square Enix calls its 3-year plan Square Enix Reboots and Awakens, and it's a 3-year plan for rebooting for long-term growth. To be clear, this is about rebooting Square Enix, and not about rebooting video games. This does not mean they're going to be doing a whole bunch of reboots of video games and shoving out a ton of remakes. Although they may be doing that anyways, that's unrelated from this. This plan is going to revolve around them rethinking their business strategy. Chief among them is a shift to a multi-platform strategy. Square Enix says it will aggressively pursue a multi-platform strategy that includes Nintendo platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and PCs. Very interesting to note the wording Nintendo platforms, as this doesn't just mean Switch, but it also means the Switch's successor, Switch 2, something that just recently Nintendo has unofficially announced, and the CEO says they'll be talking more about the Switch successor very soon. Key to this multi-platform push, Square Enix says they will build an environment where more customers can enjoy our titles in regards to major franchises and AAA titles, including catalog titles. To speak bluntly, this means that there is a strong chance that Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at some point in the future will come to Xbox, with Final Fantasy 16 already being announced for PC. I do believe the multi-platform push is a good thing. However, I don't think Xbox in particular is going to make a significant change. I mean, after all, Xbox games are coming to PS5 now. Xbox really ain't doing too great right now, bro. And I don't imagine that it's going to make a tremendous difference. I've pointed this out before, and I'll point it out again. Final Fantasy XIII was also multi-platform, back when Xbox 360 was absolutely the dominant platform. And it sold around 7 million in its lifetime, roughly the same as PlayStation exclusive Final Fantasy VII Remake. While I do think it's important to have these available on all platforms, not for existing Final Fantasy fans, because let's be honest, every FF fan knows that if you want to play the latest FF, then you need to get a PlayStation, and they're already doing that, but so that they could potentially grow and expand to new fans. That said, I do think these games should be available on PC day one, but I think the absolute biggest difference you can make here is having these games on Switch 2, because that is going to change the situation with the Japanese market. Final Fantasy in Japan has been on decline for a very long time. It went from selling roughly 2 million units each release down to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth selling only 300,000, and the big reason for this has been the decline of home consoles in Japan. And while the Final Fantasy brand is still popular and beloved in Japan, it is definitely on decline, simply because the mainline games are on a platform that most people there don't own. There's roughly 33 million Switches sold in Japan, and around 5 million PlayStation 5s. The math there is pretty simple. It's expected that Switch 2 will also do extraordinarily well in Japan. So while I don't think that Xbox will make a tremendous difference, and I think that PC will make a decent enough difference, I think the biggest delta here will be having these games on Switch 2. That's something that worked out really well for Dragon Quest XI. Now this also means that, for example, the visual fidelity of Final Fantasy XVII would have to be quite different than what we see in Rebirth or Final Fantasy XVI. We don't currently know what Switch 2 specs are going to be, but I don't know if it'll be able to stand toe-to-toe with these PS5 games, though it's possible that these games could be downgraded to run on Switch 2. I also couldn't help but wonder if they took the Dragon Quest XI approach and used more stylized graphics that would look good on Switch's tablet hardware and look even better on a home console. But all that is just speculation, but what we do know for a fact is that they are aggressively targeting multi-platform. I do think that that is a good step, but I also don't think that it is everything that Final Fantasy needs to do in order to really be a major sales player again. But really, when it comes down to it, man, AAA is just so bloated. These games have to sell a ridiculous amount, and that's just to break even. So while I'm sure, yes, the checks that Sony were providing were very good, guaranteed money that they were sure to get, and it probably did look more appealing than making an Xbox port on day one compared to getting that guaranteed check, this is probably something that is better for the long-term sustainability of the franchise and allows everyone who has current generation hardware to hop into the franchise. Unfortunately, there's even more bad news here, this being the worst. Square Enix is now the next company to be impacted by a round of layoffs, with Square Enix confirming that US and European layoffs are part of the restructuring. Publishing, IT, and Square Enix's collective indie games are affected. In the past year and a half, we have already had 20,000 video game layoffs. According to an article on VGC, those impacted will be informed this week, staff were told. In the UK, employees will enter into a 1-month consultancy period, as per local employment law, while US-based staff could leave their roles before June. The game industry is so tiring at this point. More and more people continue to lose their jobs. Again, all of this talk about all of these great games that keep coming out, and yet so many of the people making them aren't guaranteed to keep their jobs. It's utterly ridiculous, and my heart goes out to everyone who works at Square Enix, and I hope that as many people as possible will be able to keep their jobs. You know, it really does feel like at this point there is just bad industry news every single day, back to back, and it just has not let up yet. But hopefully, at the very least, Square Enix can turn itself around, because right now, things are not looking too particularly hot. And I do want what's best for Square and Final Fantasy, but the decisions they make on the next mainline Final Fantasies, they'll have to be really careful about, and really generate appeal and hype for the series in a way that we haven't had in quite some time. But these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. And I will see you all in the next video.